Competency-based education, or CBE, is so much more than a buzzword. It's about redefining success beyond content standards and redesigning student learning pathways so that a handshake at graduation truly means mastery. Today, Rose Colby dives into how CBE can turn learning experiences from checking boxes to truly feeling prepared for life beyond school. If you're ready to rethink what real success looks like for your students, then this episode's for you. Let's jump right in. If you were to explain competency-based education to a layperson, what would be kind of the key elements of that definition?
Well, I have a very simple approach to that, and whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher, I always use the notion of what do you want your child or a high school graduate to be at graduation? What does it take to get the handshake at graduation? Okay. And it should mean the same thing whatever school you attend, or whatever the next pathway in your life is, whether it's in workforce, whether it's in the armed services, whether it's in higher education of some type, either a 4-year program or a 2-year program. It means that when you get the handshake at graduation, you're ready for whatever comes at you in the next phase of your life. Okay. And what we have to be clear about is that traditionally, all we know about kids when they get that handshake at graduation is that they've earned a certain number of credits. And we're not really sure what the learning was to get the credit, because it can vary right down from teacher to teacher. Okay, so we have to do better. We have to all arrive at what is that which leads to a successful pathway in the learning, so that at that handshake at graduation, that in fact our students are prepared. Our students are prepared for the next phase of life. Okay.
That makes sense. So it's beginning with the end in mind.
Exactly.
The greatest scale
but
possible.
Traditional education is only a measure of a student's academics. All right. All of the what I call the personal success skills that are so important in your ability to be successful academically has always just been understood. It's just been part of the air, but it's never been addressed to say, okay, what do we know to be those skills that lead to that success? And we have a lot of research that points to that. Okay. And this is where now we're starting to say, all right, it's the same, whether you're in New Hampshire, you're in Colorado, or you're in Alaska. The skill sets are the same, both academically and personally. So let's get this big picture of what it is, all right, and then look at ourselves and say, what are we providing for education, and where do we need to go to reach that common understanding of what the academic and personal success skills really are.
What I'm hearing there is that it's not quite as focused just on knowledge, on academia. That there is that really strong balance of the skills and the dispositions that one needs to be successful.
And that's school. This is the some of these schools have gone to standards-based. Okay, and standards-based learning is really in response to testing, because that's the only thing that's tested. So what we know in education, you teach what's tested. All right, so there's been like a 20-year focus now on standards-based. Okay, out of the No Child Left Behind era. All right, where schools were failing. Okay, and people said, well, we really need to know, what should be taught in 3rd grade, what should be taught in 8th grade. And so standards came about, and basically standards just define content. Okay, it doesn't define learning though. Okay, and this is where competency comes in, because you master something or you're proficient at something when you are able to problem solve the content, where you can take the content that you've learned and apply it in a new situation where you have to figure it out. You have to think it through. That's when you're competent. All right.
So it's the transfer piece there, the ability to transfer to new and novel contexts.
So, and
okay.
the way
much overlap with
the
EBD.
way I have folks who aren't educators understand it is the medical model. Okay. Do you just want to have your doctor to have gone to medical school to learn anatomy? Okay. And then all of a sudden, and he gets licensed or she gets licensed as a doctor because she got an A in anatomy. and now you need your appendix removed. Okay, so your doctor's, yeah, it's going to need to know the anatomy, but is going to need to know how to problem solve within that anatomy to operate. And whatever, whatever medical model you want to use or specialty you want to use, it isn't enough. Okay, it isn't enough for your plumber to walk in the door and say, I've looked at a YouTube video and I think I know how I can solve the problem. They're going to have to know more about plumbing. They're going to have been able to have done it before for you to have any confidence that they're able to fix your plumbing. And I can go on. Tax accountants. You're going to give your taxes to somebody who can add, multiply, subtract, and divide. No, they need to be able to apply laws against the set of data that you're presenting to them in your taxes or your car, So it raises the level. So much about traditional education is about, did you get an A on the test that was based on the standards? Or are you able to show that you've learned the standards? I don't disregard those standards. They're important. They define the content. Learn it. Okay. But in the space of the learning environment, there has to be a way to assess kids and how they apply that learning. And that's where competency education comes in, is redesigning the learning around, it isn't enough that you just know it. Now we got to apply it. Now we have to assess that application. Okay. And when you do, we'll say you're proficient, but you can't go on to your next level of learning until you demonstrate that you can do that application piece.
This theme comes up again and again on the show, that our standards are the floor. And for too long, we've seen them as the ceiling, right? This is all we have to do. But I think when we reshape that our standards are the floor, and then what we do with them, the buildings we construct from them, are what matters more.
That's a good way of looking at it. That is good. And sometimes I'd say the standards are the ceiling, because a lot of times teaching goes no further than the standard. Okay. And I would say, for kids who walk in to a learning situation and they already know it, that shouldn't be their ceiling. They should be able to go deeper with it.
It should be the foundation.
Yeah.
Very cool. So what I love about your work, Rose, is that a lot of this can feel very theoretical, but you identify the four pillars of competency-based learning, and I feel like it gives them so much more clarity. So I'll just list those to start. The four you say are competencies, performance assessments, learning pathways, and competency-based grading. So might we kind of dig into each of those four pillars?
I'll say those four pillars are what I would consider the infrastructure for competency education. Okay, so you can take what you currently do traditionally, which is usually teaching, okay, instruction, assessment, okay, and grading. Okay, those are really the kind of standards. Okay, and when you look at competency education, you look at those. You're looking for learner outcomes. Okay, so that's different.
Yes.
Okay. So when you're looking for learner outcomes, it's that handshake at graduation. What are those things that you need to have in place for a student to receive that handshake? If they can't demonstrate them, then they're not ready for the handshake. Okay, you're kind of taking time out of the equation a little bit, anyways. And if you look at, we'll call those the essential competencies, the ones that are definitely those content-driven pieces, as well as those personal competencies. And by and large, when you survey folks, and when you look at the research, you come out with a set of personal competencies that pretty much everyone agrees to. All right, and I've done a lot of work with members of the public, with school boards, with teachers, in doing this, what we call the profile of the graduate work, and work is being done nationally now at the state level. All right, in many states, to have an agreed understanding of what that profile of the graduate looks like. But generally speaking, the things that kind of resonate most often are going to be, first off, critical thinking. Okay, and another one is collaboration, because the modern workplace and the higher ed requires people to collaborate in their learning now. Learning is a social event, all right? You'll see things like the need to be a global citizen. You'll see things like ethical use of digital tools. All things that are very important regardless of where a person goes. But the important thing is, if you ask a parent what the handshake at graduation traditionally means, they think it means that the child is automatically prepared for college in the traditional setting. When in reality, we don't, in many cases, teach kids how to be critical thinkers. We teach them the content and we hope that they're critically thinking, but we don't teach them how to critically think. That's situational. You have to create the situations in which they'll use their critical thinking. You have to support them in how they do that, okay, and then assess them on their critical thinking, separate from the content.
So if I'm looking at a competency, is the way it's organized, would it be something like students will know academic content, understand kind of those bigger concepts, do, and be?
Well,
would you say it's kind of
I
four
think,
pieces, but they'll know, understand, do, and be?
That's probably going to come in more as we look at what the pillars are. You have to create learning situations in which, okay, students can apply what they've learned in their content, okay, and give them the situations and the support, okay, to do to pick up those personal competencies. Personal competencies comes from doing the work of learning.
I guess I'm still thinking about this idea of the competencies themselves, though. Like, how are they structured differently than, say, a traditional standard?
Because it's a bigger concept. You're looking at conceptual learning. Okay. So if I said students will understand that conflict and cooperation has shaped our government today, that's a competency. Okay.
Beautiful. Versus the American Revolution was started in which year?
When I go through my learning K through 12 and I hit the American Revolution, as part of the discussion and the learning and the assessment comes where they're going to wrap their mind around how did the revolution and that war shape our government today and how we work and how we handle conflict and cooperation today. So you bring that up at a fourth grade level. All right. You get to 8th grade and they're doing the Civil War. Conflict and cooperation. How did conflict and cooperation shape our government today? What was happening at that time, okay, that we can look back on now and see the connections to? So quite literally, and this is kind of a UBD kind of a connection here, a competency should be something that you build on across your learning pathway, okay? And you're always assessed on the competency. So competency is the bigger level. And then as you go through your learning, you append the standards that support that concept. So that as they learn the content, all different types of content, they're always thinking up to connecting that bigger concept. That's called deep learning. Then,
as a school, you have both then. You have your set of kind of larger overarching competencies, but then you also have a set of curricular standards that are embedded within those competencies. And are the competencies transdisciplinary? So am I looking at them across disciplines, or they tend to be siloed into disciplines?
I think if I were to say where are things right now, by and large, they're siloed. Why are they siloed? Because testing is siloed. Okay. So
that makes sense.
Again, deeper learning means that the brain doesn't work in silos. All right.
Right.
School puts it there. All right. But the reality is your brain works cross-conceptually. So now what you're seeing is a lot of development of project-based learning as a modality for learning, where you recognize the fact that if you're trying to teach or you're trying to have kids do a project, let's say a science project, that, you know what, they're going to need, by virtue of the project itself, it's going to call in language arts, and it's going to call in digital literacy. It's going to call in, on the personal side, collaboration skills. It's going to call in critical thinking skills. So learning is messy.
Beautiful.
Right? But the schools have, because of the testing environment of the last 50 years, has just broken everything down into small pieces. All right. And so,
right, instead of seeing the nature of it, like a
Exactly.
painting, as opposed to the separate colors.
So I can give you an
Love it.
example of what it can look like in at the end of learning. In some schools, this is the NEXT charter school. It is in New Hampshire, and in designing that school, and it's been in existence for a long time now. What we did is we said, what are the competencies that students need to demonstrate at the end? Okay, and then we broke them down by those standards, academic standards and the personal standards. That's a different way of assessing those than the content pieces. And we created these performance indicators, which are the standards, okay, a bank of them. And this is a project-based learning school. So they only learn through projects.
Cool.
So what we had to do is we had to put them all out there and then say, if this is the project, then what are the performance indicators that come into this project? And it becomes a jigsaw puzzle. Okay?
Yeah.
And so you would expect that the projects that the ninth graders would be doing would be falling in that learning continuum, okay, under a competency of the beginning of the continuum for high school in ninth grade. All right. So each learner has their own learning profile. So their work, they recognize which performance indicators they're proficient on, and they build toward those graduation competencies. And when they meet all of those performance indicators for the competencies for graduation, they graduate. Might be in 3 years, might be in 5 years, might be in 2 years, might be in 6 years.
I love that. What a different way to think about school. I guess I'm wondering about these competencies. And do you think there is value in every school creating their own competencies? Or especially if you're first starting out, is it better just to use something like the New Hampshire competencies you mentioned earlier?
We don't have the time anymore to start writing our own. Okay, right. People that need to do this need a good structural component for the work. And I always say, because we have so many good models out there now, Building 21's got a great model. Oh gosh, I'm thinking of a lot of schools in Illinois. The South Carolina has a profile of a graduate and a whole competency framework already developed for their whole state. Colorado is doing great work. I mean, in just about every state, we've got these, models that, you can look at. I also have seen, worked with startup schools, a lot of charter schools. They don't have the institutional bureaucracy that can sometimes get in the way that is there in public schools. I work a lot of independent schools, and it's a very freeing environment that you don't have a lot of other pieces that tug at resistance, that gets in the way. And I've worked with some that want to start from scratch,
right.
And you can do it as long as you're working toward with the same guardrails, the same guiding principles.
Well, and I think there's something freeing about hearing that. If you don't have to invent it yourself. And I think, especially talking with a lot of independent school leaders, there's this thing of, but we're independent, so we don't have to follow a state's standards, so why would we? And I think seeing the value that there are states that are doing it in really cool ways, that if you're going to look at, I think you said South Carolina or at New Hampshire, at schools that are doing things differently, that it doesn't have to be everything everywhere all at once. You can take something innovative from somewhere else, eventually adapt it for yourself. But it's so much easier to start with something than to start in a vacuum.
And I think there's we don't have the time to ask. Teachers have to do this work. This isn't a top-down thing. This is teacher work. Okay, they have to build the systems. They're the experts. Okay, top-down models don't work in competency education, because as soon as they do and the leader goes out the door, it gets ditched. This has to get, we look at the research on, what sustains models of reform, Coburn's work, and it clearly is. Teachers need to do the work, own the work, and they're the captains of the ship. Okay, and you have to provide time for teachers to do the work. You just can't give them 45 minutes once a month at a faculty meeting. You have to have built-in high-performing professional learning communities that do the work each day, try things out in their classrooms. As a group, look at the results of it, Do we need to change this?
Mm.
How are we providing ways for kids to learn flexibly so that they can learn to proficiency, and that we're breaking through that one-size-fits-all model where all kids have to move at the same time to the next unit of work. We've built our own deficits. That's why education's in trouble.
Yeah.
Because if a kid doesn't learn it in the sequence, they can't use it in the next sequence. So now they're already behind.
Right.
Right. So then we try to fix the kid.
How do you address, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, then we see the kid as a problem. But I think part of this to me feels so cultural, and that there's this obstacle that I feel when I'm talking to independent schools. There's almost a fear to adopt a curriculum, or that curriculum is sometimes seen almost like a dirty word or a tool of control. Yeah. So if I'm a leader and that culture already exists in my school, what do I say to shift that thinking?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's just the curriculum. If I were to say what's curriculum, I'd say it's a definition of content. It's a definition of content.
Okay.
How curriculum gets delivered is in a teacher program or a program that a school adopts.
Right.
Therein lies the problem. It's the program, not the curriculum. So if you walk away from it, and what we've done is, and there's been a lot of research out there on many of the, especially the language arts and math curricula, because that's been tested, that has been looked at in terms of, is it just standards reference or is it standards based? Most of the time it's standards reference, so it's kind of squishy to begin with. But then the other piece is, if we give teachers the content to teach, namely the curriculum, then they should be using instructional strategies that support learner development. Okay, the programs are one size fits all, structured to the point where some of them actually are scripted, and this is what the teacher says. This is the assessment that all kids have to take.
That's what I left
at the end, and that's the problem. All right, so if teachers have the instructional strategies, and the biggest hindrance to personalized learning is the notion that teachers don't have the instructional strategies to actually personalize learning for kids within the systems that they're in. Okay, and so again, a lot of those programs that are out there don't use really good instructional strategies and activities for kids to do. It's rote, and it's low level. It hits the standard, but it doesn't address the personal skills. The assessments are low level. I worked with one district where we took both the math and language arts programs and just looked at the assessments using depth of knowledge. Okay, and we found out that most of the what was assessed was low level, depth of knowledge 1 and 2. What do you know? What can you do? Not apply, just do. And if you did that, you got an A. So here we are giving kids good grades in curriculum programs that really don't teach them to a deep enough level that they've even applied their learning in unique situations.
So what I'm hearing is that when you talk about curriculum, or when one talks about curriculum, a misconception teachers might have is, oh no, we're going to get a scripted boxed program and I'm going to lose my autonomy.
Well,
and so our job as leaders,
a lot of teachers have never had that autonomy. Those programs have been around for a long, long time. A lot of our teachers today learned that way.
Right. So then our job as leaders is to say, hey, you get to be a creator in this system, and you're getting a voice. But you're right; it's a big cultural hurdle to overcome, and I think you have to start there as a leader. If you're starting with competency-based, I think the cultural piece and understanding teacher as creator is probably that first step.
Would you agree? It's an awareness that culture will change. You can't teach culture. Okay, culture is really a conglomeration of practices that So as soon as you wrap the whole thing to kind of give a culture a bigger picture, you wrap it around the big bubble of equity. Okay, and you say, all right, so and there's a lot of different definitions for equity, but for me, equity in an environmental situation, a teaching situation, that you have to guarantee a pathway of success for every student. Okay, it's going to be different for different kids. Kids will require different pieces. But if equity means that at the handshake at graduation, everybody has the same set of personal and academic skills to be successful, then it's up to us as educators to support it in whatever way our systems need to shift to support each learner.
Very cool. And I think teachers can get behind
exactly.
that.
It's, I'll tell you, especially for an older generation of teachers that, you know, most of them are leaving the systems now, but that's the way they went into education. And I've had some amazing letters and phone calls and conversations with teachers that said, oh, I finally feel like I'm back to, you know, what I really got in this game for. And it was
sanity
just
again.
It's so rewarding to them because they can let go of a lot of this fixed, you know, I hate the timetables that teachers get with a lot of these programs. You know, you have to be done the first chapter by then, the second chapter by then, third chapter by then, and everybody takes the test on the same day. And they don't talk about formative feedback. They don't talk about good performance task assessments. They just do the, you know, paper and pencil test at the end of the chapter. And they know it doesn't mean anything, but
it's covering,
you know, and then they wonder that the kids all get good grades, but then when they get their standardized test scores back from the state, they don't match the grades that they're getting in school because the teachers are grading what the program says to grade. And if they answered it right, they get a good grade. But the standardized test is, if you looked at each of the questions on the test, many of them are DLK3 and DLK4. That means they have to apply and use critical thinking, and they bomb it. So
isn't it just so sad that these solutions that were designed because of these tests are then it's just like this vicious little monster that keeps repeating itself, right? And again, it comes back to that idea of the standards are the floor, and instead it's all we're pursuing. It's our ceiling.
It's not just that.
Oh, crazy.
School as it's designed is designed to support that model. Okay, where you don't have flexible time, you don't have flexible grouping. And that's one of the big pieces. I think if you were to look at it from a design element, how do you move it from, you know, what you're describing and what I see, you know, in classrooms every day and when I work with my graduate students, is that friction that they know it needs to be better, but in their current situations, it's impossible to do. So in working with our master's graduate students in our competency education master's program, we say, work within your locus of control. Your locus of control is your classroom. You can defend anything that you're doing that's right for kids and their learning. Okay, cool. That's all you need to do. Then you have to use 4 different lenses to change the culture for learning, the culture for teaching, and how we learn and how we teach. So we look at it from the standpoint, and these are design elements, really. Okay, time, your use of time. Okay, how can you use time differently to best support learners? Most schedules are made for adult needs, not student needs. Okay, how do you use time differently? All right, how do you use your talent differently? Now, talent means talent. It doesn't just mean professional teachers. It could mean your support personnel. It can mean learning outside in community-based settings. It can mean learning in hybrid situations for certain things, or virtual learning for certain things. So your talent can come from a variety of resources, but how would you kind of look at maybe how you've always done things? An elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, or even a high school teacher having a class size of 24 and teaches to that group of 24. When you have 24 learners that are coming from very different backgrounds with very different pieces of success and solid learning that they can apply. Okay, every kid comes to their seat in school with gaps in their learning, things they didn't learn by virtue of being in a different school district, by virtue of not learning it because they couldn't get it, they needed more time to do it, or they needed to learn it a different way, or half the year they had a substitute teacher when they were teaching, you know, in 3rd grade, and the substitute teacher, not the right person for the job, so they missed out on the curriculum that was supposed to be taught. A lot of different reasons why there's gaps. We call them Swiss cheese learners. So you have a group of Swiss cheese learners in front of you, okay, And here you have to acknowledge that there's things that they know and they don't know, where the kind of understanding is if you're in third grade, then you've learned first and second grade stuff. You're in third grade. Well, if you lifted curriculum up out of grade level and created learning progressions, okay, and saw it as a continuum, and as kids learned, okay, they move on the continuum, it means you have to deploy your teaching resources differently. One teacher can't do that with their 24 learners that have different, proficiencies. You have to say, okay, third grade teachers, there's 5 of us here. We're going into a reading block. We know that amongst our kids, we've got a range of learning. Okay, we've got kids, say if it's 5th grade, you've got kids that are probably there that are learning at 3rd grade kind of level of learning, and you've got kids that are at the 6th grade level of learning. How can we take ourselves, create a block for reading, you can do this in that, you can do it in any subject area, and say, we're going to use ongoing assessment, and we're going to move our groups. We're going to take different groups of kids, move our groups, and then as the student maybe learns a little bit faster, we can move it to the next level on that continuum. If we have a kiddo who's having difficulty, they spend longer at that point in the continuum. But you know what? When they learn it to proficiency, they demonstrate it in a task, they won't forget it. That type of learning goes into long-term memory. So now when they go further up in the progression, the gaps have been filled in. The gaps have been filled in, and they can bring their learning back and move on. So
that was a beautiful, I think the idea of dividing class levels in that way is so cool. So that was time and talent being used differently. You said there were time, 4 lenses. Are there
technology? Okay, how can you use technology in a smart way? Okay, we know that, and there's a lot of great technology, learning technology out there, and there's a lot of technology that's misused. Okay, so you use it as a support for learning. All right. So that's, and we could do this for 2 hours just on technology. And the other is resources. What are the resources that you need? And that really comes down to, community resources. It comes down to I hate to say political resources, but political pieces really play out in funding for schools. Are you looking at how you're bringing outside resources into your school? How are you bringing your students out into? Those are all pieces that need to be developed. You have to have school personnel out in the community doing a lot of this work. Okay, so
that's a whole system.
And underfunding of schools versus schools that are very well funded. How do you work those pieces? So those 4 pieces become the design elements. And that's.
And would you say that those 4 lenses are part of the learning pathway design? Like you've mentioned things like, so it's a continuum, and that students developing along a continuum, and that becomes the learning pathway.
Yep. And that's why, in the model I showed you earlier, where, a student can actually earn credits. Okay. And I'm going to stop there for 1 second. Remember earlier you were talking about curriculum. The new design of curriculum is not just curriculum, but learning progressions. Okay, so a lot of folks who aren't in our world of CBE don't know what a learning progression is or how to use it. So when people are speaking from this is our curriculum, they may be speaking from a narrow understanding of what curriculum is versus what it should be, and what curriculum design supports competency education. So.
Okay. Very cool. And just to clarify that for our listeners then, when we're talking about a learning progression or a learning continuum, what we're saying is that from when students enter school until when they leave school, these are the skills that we're expecting them to develop. And typically they'll develop in a certain progression, right? You're not going to learn geometry before you've learned how to add and subtract.
Should be linear. Yeah.
Right. So if I'm looking at right now all the different subjects for my learners, they might be here in literacy, but all the way back here in math. And I'm getting this whole story of my learner, not just, they're a mostly B student. I can see a really clear picture of where they're at, not defined by grade levels. That's just random of the foundational skills we need to succeed.
But see how school then has to redesign itself, because now classrooms are designed by chronological
Year level.
age that determines a grade level. I don't want a second grader who has great literacy skills and advanced reader to walk down to a sixth grade classroom, all right, and learn with sixth graders. You need to have kids at the developmentally appropriate level of learning with their peers for a lot of different reasons. So how do you take, and work across a grade? I guarantee you there's probably a bunch of kids in a grade level that in second grade that can read at a high level of reading. Put them together for their literacy block.
Smart.
Okay, and yet leave them
So
together.
How do you manage all of
together
this?
for the social piece. Their home base is they come back together again as a culturally and socially appropriate peer group.
It's a lot of moving pieces, and I can hear a teacher or leader hearing this and go like,
well,
"Oh my gosh!"
You can't do it in a year. Okay, and that therein lies the question that I know you're going to ask is, where do you start? Okay, and where you start is that locus of control that you have, that maybe a grade level starts it and says we're on board with this. That's what we do with our cohorts that go through our master's program at Spalding. Is they come as a cohort from a district, and so you're building teacher leadership, okay, who now has a skill set to do this design work, and it's great if you can build your own school, right? But most people can't do that. And
you've got to
start with what you have. So what are the beacons of light that you currently have within your system? Okay, it may be a group of teachers, and it may or it could be a very pressing need. Okay, and that's really where CBE started. CBE started when No Child Left Behind designated schools of failure, and they kept trying to fix the failures and they couldn't, so they finally had to break it and do something innovative in ways that personalized learning for kids to lead them to success. So those early models of CBE, the growth of CBE really came from a No Child Left Behind era that wasn't working for kids or for schools.
Very cool. I love that idea of taking something that's either beautifully working in your school or something that's broken and using that as the starting point of where might we have a little bit more autonomy to try something here.
I think the expertise comes in is you just can't do it because it sounds like a good idea. You have to have people who are researching this, who are reaching out to other schools, and we have a network through the Aurora Institute. They're our national institute for competency-based education, and we have networks of schools, that regularly report out and share their learning, as well as research that's being done. A lot of white papers and the like through Aurora. That we have the resources to do this, to make the right decisions when you need to go forward with something, to do it with the right things in mind to make the decision that works in the best interest of your kids. And what works for a student in Illinois may not be the answer for what's going to work in Tennessee. So there's a lot of different components to this, but you need to know you can't do it like a strategic plan that says this can take I've been working with some schools for 15 years now. Okay, it just doesn't get dropped and you do it all. You have to start it, right? And then as you move it, say, grading's going to come up. If we're doing this, our grading system doesn't fit this. Now what do we do, right?
Right. So tackle problems as they come.
And then find the solutions and the supports for it.
So if I were starting, I might think first of my portrait of the graduate and get people conceptually on board with that idea. Seems like learning progression would be the next kind of big step of how do we get to portrait of the graduate.
I don't think it's that sequential. I think the work is messy because someone's going to say, in order to do the portrait of the graduate, let's say, what would it look like at the elementary level? Okay, well, now I need to define what we currently teach in our classrooms, and how are we going to look at what our students would need for this part of that continuum. Okay, and then first off, do our teachers know how to teach to that? Do they know how to assess to that?
Right.
And the big piece is, do they know how to communicate it? Okay. Because
Right.
the one thing you can get an agreement with, okay, is when you do this work around the profile of the graduate is you've got the community working on this profile of the graduate. You've got the buy-in. A lot of people say,
right.
how am I going to get buy-in, from my staff or from the community? I keep saying, you're not doing the work, they are. If they're doing the work,
Right.
it's their model, and you as educators have to support what they in the community value. So the essential question becomes,
right.
do you teach, do you assess, and do you communicate what your community values? That's the essential question. Okay, and it always comes back to
that. And you
that.
got to take each of those pieces.
To take each of those pieces. Yeah. We had a lot of the work that we did in New Hampshire started at, we were working on competencies. This is where it's messy part. We were working on developing competencies, and at the same time, we recognized performance assessment was a need. And so we went through 3 years of cohort work with schools and with districts to have teachers work overtime. A cohort would start one summer and they would finish up the following summer. They would be in contact with each other, and they just worked on performance assessment within the curriculum that they currently had. So now you've got competencies.
Because that's a beautiful
inquiry. They
did
the performance assessments without virtue of the competencies yet. Okay, but we knew we had to plug performance assessment in. All right, and they had to become assessment literate. It just doesn't happen. So now you do that.
So it's chicken and an egg.
It's, what do you both at the same time? Then you say, well, all of a sudden now you've got teachers who are starting to use rubrics in their assessments. Well, now if they're going to start using rubrics, how is that connected to their grading system? So now we have to open up how does a grading system have to change in order to adequately communicate learning? Okay, not document.
What are the biggest shifts to the grading system that you see have to change?
Well, I think even especially if you're in standards-based grading, you need to do it right. Okay, we have our national leaders in standards-based grading, Tom Guskey and Doug Reeves and Ken O'Connor, Rick Wormley. All folks have written extensively about, Dweck is another one, have written extensively about equitable. Oh, Joe Feldman, number one guy. Okay, if you really want to dig into equity in grading systems, the most inequitable practices, inequitable practices in our school districts today are their grading systems.
Right, the average.
Okay, and if we know it's inequitable, then some folks, I agree with a couple of folks, and I think it might have been Guskey that said it, it's malpractice. It's malpractice. If ethically you know it is not the right thing, then you should not be doing it. Okay?
Right.
So averaging, mathematically, it isn't even the right thing to do. If you look at the definition for an average should be the number in a narrow set of data that best represents the group. If you have a 0 to 100 grading system, which you shouldn't have, but that span is too wide for any one number as an average to represent the whole group. So you shouldn't even be using averaging.
Well, because you're punishing learners. You're saying that, you didn't know this at the start of the unit, so there's no way you're ever going to achieve. And it just continues the inequity. Okay, so the removal of averages, are there other shifts from traditional to competency-based grading that are kind of hurdles? You
don't want to create the grading system. You want the grading system to grow out of the evolutionary changes that are happening in your assessment practices. Okay, so as teachers become assessment literate, that they really maximize formative assessment and feedback. Okay, and not grade it all the time. Grade the summative learning, that when the student is ready to take that summative piece. Okay, then things start falling into place. But you just can't change a report card or change a grading system prior to all of this structural work, structural work that needs to be done in instructional strategies that support personalized learning, in the good curriculum that we're now defining as content and progressions, and then the performance assessment work. So it takes a number of years, okay, for it to go across. And some people will say, all right, how is the best way to change my system? if you know
Right.
who you are, and some people will say, well, let's start K1, 2, and then move it up. And as the kids go through the system, don't start them out in a system that you pull that away and give them standards again, give them standard traditional learning. Morph your system and evolve your system as the kids move through it by level. Okay.
Do you find that's an effective way to kind of make this change?
Yep. I have seen it work. I've seen it work at the middle level, because a lot of times, you say you have a system, but if you look at the grading systems, it's interesting to do this with a room full of parents, and they go around the room and they see the report cards for each grade level, and they're like, seriously? They realize that, teachers are arriving at grades the way each teacher wants to do it. Okay, under an umbrella.
It's just nonsense.
You need to have really good policy. You really need to go through and take the inequities out of the grading piece, and that's no compromises on that. Okay, you'll have teachers who will clutch their rank books and digitally now and say, I have to give zeros if they don't do the work. I have to give zeros if they don't do the work. You can't give zeros if they don't do the work. It is not equitable. You can have a 40-point grading system, should you give Fs? In a well-developed competency-based system, you don't. You are not yet. You are not yet.
Okay, so it's just...
And now you have to say, how does our system support the not yet? Because we have to bring them to competency. That is our handshake. Our handshake is that they have met competency. A D isn't competent.
It just sounds like we're getting rid of the culture of punishing a deficit.
Exactly.
Because I think when we punish a deficit, we're innately blaming our students. Oh, you didn't.
We're documenting their failure.
Right. And instead of asking ourselves, what is the environment that led to this? Right. And what are the supports that you need to thrive?
Pause.
You.
Thanks. Sorry, I hope you can cut it out. Okay. Yeah.
No worries.
We live on a lake, and we just had a big storm that came through, so we had to have a workman come fix our dock. So yeah. Anyway.
Oh.
Yeah. So traditionally we document failure.
Well, it's just a step along the way.
Yeah,
it's
but
not the end
now
point.
the system now has to be able to support. I see in a lot of places they'll do learning labs. Okay, so that and they don't wait till the end of the semester to find out that they haven't met a competency. It's in the moment. They're doing the work. They tried the summative. They didn't learn it. They have to go back and relearn it. They have to do it then. You can't wait till the end of the year and do course recovery in the summer. Come on,
Right.
Yeah,
just more punishment.
Yeah.
What are they doing with their time? I guess thinking from that practical spot of a teacher, if a kid's saying, I already know how to do this, I'm not going to show it to you.
They have to, through formative, you just can't say, I know it. There has to be, everything is evidence-based. Show me that you can do it. Now, I may give you, I've seen some teachers that'll do this, like for homework. She can give the same homework to all kids. Okay. So what she'll do is she'll put 3 things up on the board, and she'll say, I want you to try these 3 things. It might be a prompt. It might be a math problem. It might be a science explanation. And they puts 3 prompts up there. Okay. And then it's the last 10 minutes of class. And she says, answer it. They do it quickly. Okay. Well, if you got this one wrong, you probably need to do this piece of work right here. Okay. If you got that one right, and so they leave with differentiated homework. Right. So the kid is going to do their homework because they have a reason to do it. And they're not doing something that they already know. Okay. And that's how you keep learners engaged, by having them personally recognize, my teacher knows me, knows what I need. I have trust and confidence in him or her to honor that.
Right.
To honor it.
Well, that it changes the culture of assessment. That assessment isn't something that happens to me; it's something that happens for me to inform my learning, and that happens. Yeah, it's a relationship building piece, which many U.S. students would not describe assessment as relationship building.
No, but what is always at play is competency. Remember the medical model. Competency is in the demonstration, and you build the rubrics around that demonstration. Okay.
Interesting.
So I don't care if you can pass a spelling test and get 100 on it. Okay. If when you're writing your essay and you're misspelling the words, then you didn't learn it. You learned it for a quiz.
Right.
Okay. Now, how are we going to learn, so, but see how you have to change that culture for learning. It's much easier to do if you grow the learners up in the system from the start. So can you see that, how that model of evolution would be a good better shift for the learners? You can't do this for kids who are in high school. These, major shifts in things. I can't tell you how many grading system horror shows I've seen where they've changed the grading system for juniors and seniors in high school. The parents come through the door screaming. I would be a parent that would come through the door screaming, because everything changed. And now my kid got A's as freshmen and sophomores. Now they're getting C's and B's, or they're getting all A's, So you really have to be careful for how you do what you do. And it has to be inclusive of what your community wants. And when the community is involved in that profile of the graduate, that needs to be unpacked for the community to say, well, if this is what you want, let's look at a report card. Okay, I do this with my graduate students. Does this capture that? I'll say, how do you communicate, learning within your school district? So they have to go get their school's transcript or their district's transcript and say, if this is what's communicating the student's learning, now take a look at a competency-based transcript. Okay, what's the best communication? How will a college know or a workplace know that the person that they're getting is best equipped and can be successful? It's going to be with a competency-based report card, which looks very different. Okay, does it have academic achievement? Absolutely, front and center, but it has much more. Okay,
it's a whole picture.
And if you base your report card on your profile of the graduate, and you grow into both, because it's not going to happen overnight, then you'll get there. So
move slow to move fast.
Slow, and it's going to go in spurts. Focus on the end. It will definitely go in spurts. A lot of this work when you first start can just be anticipatory work. Okay, you can anticipate where, from everything that's happening nationally, you can anticipate where you need to go in instructional methodology, in curriculum. Okay. And start moving in that direction, while at the same time you have, I worked with one district where it took 2 years to do the profile of the graduate. Okay. Because principals went out into the community, they met with their highway departments, they met with their town hall workers, they met with corporate corporations and management and corporations, small business owners in the community. They went to nonprofits. They gathered all this information. They had parent groups. They had teacher groups. They had had board education board groups, and then had to spend a good length of time compiling all of those results and coming out with something that whoever in the community looked at would know where it came from. Right. Ownership.
What an undertaking. Yeah. Wow. It feels overwhelming, I think, hearing it all laid out in this way.
But we're at a good place now because now we have the resources to do the work. We don't need quite so many pioneers, okay? Because we have a lot of resources, and then a lot of people have those little shining stars in their schools or their districts where they've found things that are very successful for them, and they're on their way.
Right. Well, and like you said, it doesn't have to be everything everywhere all at once. Maybe your school isn't ready to move to learning progressions yet. Maybe start with more performance-based assessment or more an event-on formative assessment. That's a beautiful starting point. Or maybe you want to start with your K-1-2 bands and get the whole school collaborating on how to instigate those changes. Seems like there's lots of ways to skin this metaphorical cat, right? So it's a matter of knowing your team and seeing where the excitement rests and kind of providing those sparks and potentials.
Exactly. And I have to advocate for teachers. Teachers need the support. They need that time during the day to work. They need leaders. They need leaders to be out in the community talking about this. You You don't say, we're having a parent meeting for 7:00, next Wednesday night, and we're gonna talk about profile of the graduate. No, you have to have school leaders out in the community, working with the community in their time, in their space. It redefines the role of leadership. Leaders should be serving their teachers, not top down, serving their teachers, in ways that they can change schedules. They can change resources and allocation of resources. They can do a lot. So, and I've been a principal for most of my professional life, and I put the blame on a lot of principals that just say, just keep it as it is, just no waves, and I'm like, no,
Right, because you can't talk collective efficacy and teacher efficacy and then have a top-down
and you can't
authoritarian
put the teachers out at the other end of the plank by asking them to do something in the classroom that the parents don't understand. And then they're put on the defensive. There has to be this open communication that goes beyond, the newsletter that goes out every Thursday. So.
Any final pieces of advice you have for a school leader who's maybe listening to this, feeling a little overwhelmed, feeling a little excited?
I think being overwhelmed is part of the process. I think they have to be very honest with themselves about the failures of American education today. I think they have to do some reading. I think they have to seek out resources. And it's in all forms, from podcasts, from videos that are out there. There are tons of videos on student demonstrations in competency-based schools, participating in their statewide work, that's going on, being very informed about their Department of Education and what's available through them to support some of this work. Independence, I just say half the burden is off you. You can really look at yourselves and say, where do we want to be? Okay. I think one, just a little advice for independence. I was working with one independent school, and I was having dinner at night with the team that brought me into the school, and they said, I asked the question, why do you want to change? And this one principal looked at me and said, there's one reason. He said, our tuition is $12,000 a year. And I know a parent is walking in, looking at my school with a check for $12,000. If they like what they see, they'll give me the $12,000 for that kid's tuition. But if they go down the road to the next independent school down the road, and they like what they see better there, guess where the check is going to go?
Very practical.
So he says, I'm not saying that I'm doing it for the money. I'm saying that we need to keep pace with our times, okay? And what parents want for their kids, the learning experiences that we offer our kids. I can go down the road and see in the next independent school down the road that there's maker spaces in every grade level, okay? And it has a rich arts program, performing arts program. That's what I want for my children. I'm going there, okay? Versus the classical traditional, which they can get in public school and not have to pay $12,000 for.
That's it. What is your value add? What is your differentiator?
So that seems to be the breakthrough. And in my experience with independent schools, they oftentimes they're doing some pretty progressive stuff to begin with, which is really nice to see.
Right.
And they can move this work forward, without the barriers that public school systems have. But yet that is a factor that's been one of those little spur points for change in the independent and private world, is the competition of it all.
Right.
Keep up. And now there's so many charter schools. In most states there's rich legislation that allows for more charter schools than ever before. So there's more choices for parents.
So keep up. You've got to justify it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. This has been so insightful. I think for me, it's a kind of a new term that I'm wrapping my head around, and I just have come away with so much clarity. Also, so many more questions, which to me is the mark of a great chat. So thank you so much.
And I'd just like to recommend to the audience to go to the Aurora Institute, AURORA Institute, and for just a rich resources for for all of the structural pieces that we've been talking about, as well as tons of different school experiences that are shared out, rich research background that can help you in making your decisions when you move your school forward.
Love it.
Oh,
Thanks so
welcome.
much, Rose.